Okay, so we're going to look at part two, or this is the second of three lectures on George Orwell's 1984, which I introduced last time and compared and contrasted 1984 to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and argued that both of the books were what would be classified as dystopian fiction, and under a broader heading of speculative fiction, which includes fantasy literature and so forth, and all sorts of science fiction, and even like the superhero stuff of the 20th century as well. So there's a great deal of mashing together different types of genres in the 20th century. It's one of the reasons that people struggle when I begin to teach this course and talk about genres like the epic and the lyric and the tragedy and so forth, and say that there are very particular features of this which constitute a genre. And in the ancient world, there are only 5 genres of literature, basically 5 main genres of literature, including the satire. And in our day, the idea that there are any particular forms for literature it's hard to promote that idea because there are so many mixes of genres in 20th century fiction. And we're in the 20th century now. So this has features of it that you might call realism. Like when you read it, although it has the scientific and obviously the ominous futuristic tone to it, it also has the air of realism. You don't get any sense that it's imaginative literature. So if you read Tennyson's Lady of Shalott, that's obviously not realism in its vantage point. It's a sort of fantastic, and you know that he is imagining a situation there. Whereas here, although the author is imagining, it's written in terms of realism, so gritty that it strikes us right away of how realistic it is. And details like the cold day in April, and of course the dystopian note, the clocks were striking 13. Of course, they never strike 13. So that's not realistic, but everything else about it, the smell of boiled cabbage, the gritty dust entering along with him, and the very details about the genre suggest that it is realistic in its portraiture. And it also is written from the vantage point of an omniscient narrator. The narrator seems to know, we have no reason to doubt the narrative perspective. Whereas if you went back and looked at Heart of Darkness, the narrative perspective was highly suspicious to us after a while. We trust the moral authority of the narrator. And we don't have any reason to do that here. So it's a third person omniscient narrator who's telling us a story and occasionally letting the characters like Winston Smith speak, but he's describing the landscape, and there's a lot of descriptive narrative. So here, note that he's setting the stage. It's not like a drama where the characters are speaking. There's very little staging or description of the environment. Here, it's all environmental. He's talking about what happens around them constantly. The landscape, the people, and above all, the omnipresence of Big Brother, this mustachioed character who is the face of Ingsoc. And that's how the novel begins. And because of its realism and because of its descriptive features that are very detailed, it has the sense of, as I say, realism. We don't have any sense that this is imaginative or that we should doubt it. And the fact that it is so plausible is in part because I think what both Orwell and Huxley are doing is extrapolating and imagining a future in which the ideas of the elites, and they're among the elites, by the way, they've gone through Eton College as a teacher and as a student, and George Orwell writes and for the BBC. And Huxley is a famous novelist, and I talked about how strongly he was a part of the British establishment there. So they know how the establishment thinks, and they know that the way they look at life around them, and they know how they're trying to engage with that, and that engagement is largely through mechanisms of control. So he's not talking about Nazi Germany. There's nothing of a anti-Semitism here per se. There isn't any racial animus that I note in 1984, which would have been a feature of Nazi Germany. He's removed that. But he is talking about totalitarianism. There's no doubt about that. And he admits that he is, just like Aldous Huxley was. And that is because the scientific viewpoint of the elite is totalitarian. It's seeking to control everything through technique. And technique includes technology. Technology is one of the features of technique, but it's not the only one. And I mentioned Neil Postman last time. He writes a really good book called Technopoly, which I have not ever put on a course to be read, but I recommend it. And it's talking about the not just the use of technology in everyday life, but the willing to conform to a tech-driven worldview. And a tech-driven worldview has to work for machines to operate, like AI. AI functions because we are willing to act in accordance with certain patterns of behavior, and then it seeks to control that. And you can see that all over the place in the dystopian fiction, even in films. I'm trying to think of now, what was the name of that film with Keanu Reeves in it? Sorry? The Matrix. It's a organized, controlled reality in which you start to question, well, what's real and what's not real? So it's just an extension of that. And you could look at other films, the one with Tom Cruise, Minority Report, where they, have pre-crime things. They predict things that are going to happen before they've actually happened. All these are engagements with the capacities of technology and what the elites will be willing to do based on that to try and control the outcomes. So there's a general description in the 20th century of a mindset on display that creates a world as a consequence of that. And as I say, Margaret Atwood will write her own contributions to this as well. But it's a very much of a 20th century genre, the idea that there are elites that govern people's lives and they act in accordance with things other than what we would expect of them. They're not acting in accordance with explicitly religious motivations. There's no religion at all in it. And they also don't seem to have any sense of a common human nature between them and the people that they're conditioning. There's no sense of justice. To think, well, this is a person, and there are certain things that I can't do to this person because they're a person. That has gone from the whole framework of understanding. It's about the power of the elites to control outcomes, and they don't see any limitations on that power. And as I say, that Lewis's Abolition of Man describes exactly that and says that is the biggest problem with it, is that because they don't see a common humanity, there are no limits, and they don't acknowledge any gods. There's no limits on what the conditioners will do to their fellow human beings. And in fact, they may decide to abolish humanity altogether. And that would be the beginning of what I call post-humanism. And the environmental movement of our day is part of that. We're going to save the environment, save the planet for the sake of the planet. And to do that, we're going to have to control procreation. We're going to have to control carbon footprints. We're going to have to control people's movements. We're going to have to control their consumption. And controlling it can take all sorts of technical paths, from like a digital currency to monitoring your car. You can surveil it with satellites, or your tripometer, like how many miles have you driven this year, and if you drive over that limit, then there'll be a penalty because, of course, you're using more carbon, and so forth. So all of this is a growing control which is talking more about a mindset than anything else. And so that's why I think it's important on the course, is because I said it was in some ways an exercise in comparative worldviews, from the pagan polytheistic worldview of the Greeks, who acknowledged gods and acknowledged certain standards of behavior, right and wrong, immoral and moral, right? There are certain ways you can treat your guests, and if you don't do them, the gods will be angry, because there's a sense of right and wrong, and you can't murder your guests, you can't abuse them, you should show them hospitality. These are civilized values. On through the Christian area, when there's a big transformation of culture in accordance with Christian doctrine, that every human being bears the image of God, every human being, and therefore they deserve justice. And so this greatly elevates the groups that in the ancient world basically have no status, like women and children, so that they're given full human rights and human status. And then we get to the Enlightenment, we start to see a retreat from that. The idea that human nature is something that we should consider in practical terms. You know, we can commodify human beings. Well, maybe, yeah, we have a problem with the economy. People are poor. They're stealing. They're begging. They're annoying us. They're also a political threat. There are so many Catholics in a Protestant country. What are we going to do? I have a solution. The solution is we'll eat them. It will pay them to eat the babies. And obviously it's a satire, but the point on the course is that what we're doing is starting to see human nature as something not that we have, but as something that we can possess and sell and eat and kill. And Heart of Darkness dealt with the same sorts of things. So there's a growing tendency from the Enlightenment onward, with its atheist humanism, to treat humanity as something that is manageable, controllable, and also dispensable. As I said, or we said last time, it's a lot to take on. It's a very dark ending to the course. But that's the context for today. And I mentioned Hannah Arendt's work on totalitarianism. In 2022, a Belgian psychologist by the name of Matthias Desmet wrote a work riffing off Arendt called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And he wrote it in the midst of COVID-19. And he says, and I'll just read, this is just a summary. During the COVID-19 crisis, Desmet played a critical role in pointing out fundamental mistakes in the way in which Western governments responded. According to Desmet, the policies of lockdown have been more detrimental and harmful than the virus itself. And they're hiding this fact in the statistics that count victims of the policies as victims of the virus. So if you restrict people to their homes, and you won't allow them into the hospitals, and you won't allow them to do cancer diagnoses and so forth, then arguably the cure is worse than the ailment, the virus. And that's his point. But then he's more interested less in that than in the whole psychology that comes with that. And he talks about it as a faith in science. And again, I resonated with this immediately, because having read 20th century dystopian fiction, you can see that this is a very common sentiment amongst the writers of the day, is what, not belief in science, but scientism. So along with atheist humanism, we have scientism, which is the belief in that science and scientists are the only ones who can critique science. So that's a position. It's not a lack of trust in science. It's a trust in scientists as the unquestioned authorities on the matters of science, as if what they said could not be critiqued or inquired into. And that was part of that terrible period of our lives a few years back, in which the lockdowns took place. But in 1984, that future is one that isn't a temporary thing, it's the permanent state of affairs. And Big Brother, this guy, or at least the portrait of him, governs everybody and creates an enemy. And the enemy is his name is Goldstein, and his black book and so forth, and he's trying to sabotage their way of life, etc. So they've vilified that. Now, if you wanted to, you probably could see something of fascism in this by making a Jewish figure the author of a book that, you know, animates the whole public against him. But Britain's been renamed Airstrip 1. It's a province of Oceania, which is a super state governed by the party, so very much overtones of communism. This is written in 1949. In 1949, Chairman Mao in China begins the communist revolution there as well. I don't think that's Orwell has that even in mind. I'm just saying in terms of timeline. And Big Brother's the leader of the party, at least the face of the party, and that face, which we see everywhere around us, keeps people in a perpetual state of fear and submission. And there are various ways, and one of them is mass surveillance, which is really easy for us to imagine because our technology has developed so much now that mass surveillance is just a fact of everyday life. You know, there are cameras on the streets. There are cameras in classrooms. There are cameras in Britain. They're on every street corner. So when I studied in the UK, they started going up during the 9/11. Actually, they went up just before 9/11. So they were going up to prevent crime or to observe crime. You can't prevent crime with a camera, right? You can't, unless they have a mechanism whereby when a crime happens, immediately a signal is sent and somebody rushes to solve the problem. That never happened. But there would be footage of it, and it could be used against you in a court. You know, we saw you at this place at this time, and you're recorded having done this, so it should aid the criminal justice system in, you know, ensuring that we actually are getting criminals punished and not unjustly accusing people and so forth. So it uses technology. So the growth of technology all around us, which now allows me to record this lecture and put it up on YouTube and can be watched anywhere around the world. And if I live streamed it, somebody in Australia could be seeing it. It's like one of Tolkien's Palantir, right? These seeing stones. Remember I don't know if you know Tolkien's Lord of the Rings well enough. Remember the seeing stones, the big ball, crystal ball types things? And there's 7 of them, and you can hold them and look through them. And then on one side is Sauron, because he's managed to get one. And through this technology, he's able to grab hold of those on the other side and to twist their minds and so forth. I think Tolkien is using the same sort of technique to illustrate how technology is not neutral. And while it might serve you, you are also being conditioned by it. And I've said this to people repeatedly about the use of laptops and smartphones, that you are using them, but when you use them, you're dependent on them, and they're conditioning you to receive information and to process it through the technology. And that might, you know, the reason people will give for using it is that I can type faster than I can write. And I said, well, yeah, but I can record perfectly better than you can take notes with your laptop. And so if you're worried about missing something, go to the original and just watch it again. You can scroll back, and I missed that bit. Well, I'll slow it down, or I'll go to write that section, and I can watch that again if I miss something. The purpose of taking notes is for you to process it yourself. It's not the amount of notes, it's the quality of the notes. You're making connections in your own head between what I say and what you think. So don't be quoting me verbatim, because it's not worth it. If you're worried about that, as I say, just watch the video again. When you write with a pencil in particular, the pencil drags on the page, and you're actually remembering what you're hearing in a way that, and you're doing so at a slower rate than you would if you were typing it, because some people can type with extraordinary speed. I'm not one of them, but some people are really, really good typers. What you're supposed to be doing in lectures is processing it. Everybody's heads down on your devices. Is it that tedious, or what's going on here? Or are you just done? It's the end of the semester. It's sort of get that, if that's the case. But that's the actual process of learning is different than recording information. The internet records information. Google has more information on it than ever existed in the entirety of human history, in part because that's what it's doing. It's uploading all of the historical documents. There are people involved in doing that, like Christian historical texts are being copied and uploaded, so now they're accessible anywhere in the world. You don't have to go to some archive in a library where there's only one copy of this book. You can actually access it digitally. So in that sense, it's marvelous. But what it also does is it throws all the information together in such a way that it's so huge that you can't possibly know what's important. You can't know. There's no wisdom in this sort. So there's a difference here, and you need to understand as a Christian, there's a difference between knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Knowledge is one thing. Google gives you knowledge. That's what it does well. It gives you the biggest amount of knowledge at speed that you could ever possibly imagine. You can receive it in that fashion. So it's really good at quantity. That's what machines do. They do quantity really well. They don't do understanding nearly as well. That's partly what you're doing when you're writing notes and you're writing essays and you're taking exams, is you're moving from knowledge to understanding. You're not just repeating what Dr. Masson said in class. You're integrating your own thoughts with it, and you're rearranging it so that you can show that the knowledge that you had presented in the text you read, you've processed it in such a way so that you're starting to place it in, if you imagine your head as an archive, you're putting things in the right place so that you have an orderly mind. And you can relate these things to other things. You can start, as I say, this taxonomy is going on inside your head so that you realize, well, what's really important and what's not important. As I said, most of what I say is not important. It's not worth writing down. What's worth writing down is your thoughts in response to the lecture, because that's part of your process of developing yourself. That's what we're here for, is for you to become a person of understanding. But the third stage is the stage of wisdom. And that's the true aim of real education, is cultivating wisdom and virtue. That's what education is. It's cultivating wisdom and virtue. And the way you do this is, first of all, you ought to have a model of virtuous wisdom in front of you. The teacher is supposed to be that person, because they have character. You're not going to see their character in all places, but their judgment is informed by a virtuous character, and their wisdom is connected to that. And the exposure to that works because people imitate those around them. That's why Tyndale has a statement of faith. The public universities don't have a statement of faith. They have credentials, you get a PhD, but they don't have to sign up to any religious statement or even code of conduct per se. They can't break the law, but they don't actually have to uphold Christian ideas of personhood, or Christian ideas of justice, or Christian ideas of mercy, or Christian ideas of compassion, or Christian ideas of loving your enemy, or Christian idea of truth and falsehood, right? Because those are Christian ideas. They're not shared across the world. They're not, one of the critiques of the whole Western human rights movement is exactly that. People say, those are just Western rights. You call them human rights, but they're not human rights. They're what you call human rights, you Westerners. And they call them Westerners, but actually they're not Western per se. Most of them are actually Christian. That the West, because it was Christian, has simply assumed are the way we look at things. But then you come to other countries and say, well, hold on. We don't think that marriage is between two people. You can have multiple wives. We don't agree that criminals deserve a fair trial before a jury, and that they're innocent until proven guilty. We don't believe that. We believe that they're guilty until proven innocent. They'll say, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. This person is very controversial. Well, then he must have done something because people are really angry at him. So he must have done something. He's guilty. We just haven't found the cause yet. But eventually, so that presumption of innocence, that's a very Western thing, or it used to be. Now it's not anymore. Now there's a presumption of guilt, group identity guilt. Like if you're a white man, as I look like I am, I'm actually indigenous, but never mind. So I can play that card. I'm status Mohawk. Yeah, I've got the card, but I look white. But so people will say, "What? But you're saying that because you are a da 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 da," and they'll list my identity group characteristics. And the assumption there is that that identity, as they call it, carries certain guilt with it, irrespective of whether I've done any of those things. I'm implicated in all those features. Well, that's a very non-Western way of looking at things, truthfully, although now it's very Western. It never used to be, but it is now. But that's because of the subversion of Christian culture by atheist humanism. And not just atheist humanism, but more to the point, by a type of conditioning. And the conditioning here is to set groups off against one another, to get them angry and to ignore the conditioning of the conditioners. So I can think that my enemy is anyone that doesn't bear my identity group characteristics. And it's a struggle from some groups got to win. It's going to be mine or it's going to be yours. Well, then I'm going to make sure it's mine because it's the survival of the fittest, of course. Well, that's Hitler's Germany, but it's also our day. It's just, the TDSB policy is only white people can be racist, by the way. Toronto District School Board, only white people can be racist. They actually say that, which is an extraordinary thing. It's crazy. Now, they probably know that other cultures can be racist because all around them they will see people expressing racist views and holding racist positions very strongly, in fact. But the TDSB, because it comes from this white Christian background, is expressing its knowledge of its guilt and the need for it to atone for its guilt in public by holding this strong position. Because for justice to take place, we don't want any confusion of the facts saying, well, actually, both parties said racist things. Well, that would complicate matters. Anyway, moving away from the book here. But surveillance, as I said, is part of the novel's world, and there are hidden microphones everywhere. And these microphones are also in the countryside, not just in the city. And the people who transgress become unpersons. Interestingly, that's the phrase that's used. What that means is they lose access to food. And this is one of the people's fears in our day about digital currencies, is that it will allow people who transgress the party's rules to lose access to their credit. And they effectively become unpersons. You go to the hospital and they say, sorry, who are you? Well, you don't show up on our files. You committed a crime? Okay, could I see your driver's license? Oh, you've had your driver's license taken away. Why did you do that? Why did you lose your driver's license? Did you commit a traffic offense? No, because I've been prohibited from driving as a punishment. Anyway, these things are happening in this setting, and it begins in London in Trafalgar Square, which has been renamed Victory Square. And in London, in Trafalgar Square, there's a statue of Horatio Nelson on Nelson's Column. It's a famous thing for a landmark in Britain. And it's been replaced by Big Brother. So you could see what has happened. And an illustration of the totalitarian future is when the statues of the heroes of old have been knocked down and replaced by new statues, which is what's happening in Canada right now as well. And the renaming of squares. Dundas Square. Dundas was an abolitionist. Henry Dundas was a famous abolitionist. They changed it, well, I don't know. People you've never heard of. I can't remember what they named it. I genuinely can't remember what they renamed Young Dundas Square. There has a name I've forgotten. But statues of Sir John A. Macdonald and Laureate, these are being knocked down by activists, and we get substitutes for that. These things are, when a culture is now turning against its past and it's judging its past and rewriting its past in accordance with a perspective. And so what Orwell is doing here, and I think he's really brilliant in this, is London is a familiar place, and yet he defamiliarizes Londoners and presents to his readership what London might look like under a totalitarian regime, where the names of the streets change, the monuments change, and the society and the culture with it changes. Now, as I say, we met last time Winston Smith. He's the main protagonist, and he's our hero. And I think this is one of the ways in which I said I thought Huxley's Brave New World was probably more accurate, but I think this is a better novel. And one of the reasons is because it has a hero. And we empathize with the hero, and we want him to, it's like a battle of good against evil. In Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, I don't even know who the good and the evil are. I guess the good guy is the savage that comes in, but he doesn't seem particularly heroic. He doesn't qualify. We're not with him enough. He's a character, but he's just another character, right? Whereas here we have a hero in Winston Smith, and he's the underdog, and he has sentiments that show that he is a virtuous man, and he is rebelling against the total control of the world, and we're with him. So that is a vehicle to bring us into the novel and give it great suspense in a way that Huxley's Brave New World doesn't have. Yes?
Further in the book, where like you find out that he's married, and I go, oh, okay. And then next thing you know, this man is going to like a prostitute when he knows he's like literally against the law, and also his capacity for hatred, the hatred of Julia, and the striving the things that he wants to do to this woman. I'm like, I was for you.
Yes.
And like, I just want some of the light. I want some to really.
It's a bit like Heart of Darkness. It's a bit like the Heart of Darkness in the sense that the main character, we begin very sympathetic towards him. Very, although here even more so than Heart of Darkness. And as the novel progresses, we start to say, hold on a second. And then eventually it's, oh my goodness, I don't like this character at all. Right. But what it's showing, and what I think, but again, this is part of the brilliance of the novel, what it's doing there by making us, the man we sympathize with at first, start to become distasteful to us, is show how the totalitarian state corrupts everyone. Even the people most admirable get dragged down into that. Now, you talked about his wife and the prostitute. His wives in 1984, so it's the opposite of Huxley's Brave New World. You have sex to procreate. That's it. So you have a wife assigned to you by the party, you have children, and then it's done. Because what they realize, what the party realizes, is that husbands and wives that love each other will obey something other than the party. It'll be a bond that will unite them, and they want to break all resistance. And they can't have a man who's going to do anything to protect his family. The family unit becomes a means of perpetrating the regime, but beyond that, we can't have family loyalty above the state. And so we condemn him for being unfaithful to his wife, but his wife's gone as well, and they're not allowed to have any sort of, never mind sex, that's almost irrelevant. They're not allowed to have any love that threatens the party. They've had their children, and now he doesn't even know where she is. But I mean, his desires haven't gone away, and he expressed them illegally. Why are they illegal? Well, because they're not serving the purposes of procreation. And part of us even likes him for that, because he's defying the party and so forth. But then you find yourself in the uncomfortable position of saying, I'm on board with the man who's, you know, sexually promiscuous for the sake of his promiscuity, because it goes against this authoritarian regime. And part of you is saying yes, and part of you is saying, I feel ambivalent about that. At its utmost ambivalent, but I'm starting to feel like there's something wrong with this as well. And he's being degraded in the process. Me too. When I first read it, I was disappointed. But again, but then you have to understand the conditions of the story and imagine yourself as a human being in this world in which you're so regulated that love is not a possibility for you. Children, yes. Love, no. You're not allowed to. You love Big Brother. That's it. He allows no competition. And the natural affection that exists between people is being sabotaged by their distrust for one another. And so here's a man who's crying out for affection. And of course, it expresses itself in ways that we might find distasteful. But all the same, we understand a man in this condition. He's like an animal. And what's even more interesting is that the woman who seduces him is a young woman, much younger than him, and she's beautiful. And he's 39. We meet him, and he's 39 going on 69. Like, he's an old guy. Like, he's breaking down. He's not very attractive at all. And so he said, well, what's in it for her? And then we find that this is just her pattern. She takes lovers. And why does she choose him? And that's part of the reason is that he thinks at first she's trying to rat him out, because why is a young woman interested in me? I'm a old man. I'm not a match. So what's going on here? And there's a perversity in her choice of him. And so even the amorous connections between people are marked by perversity. So again, this is part of the dystopian world here, is that sex has been disconnected from love altogether. And Huxley does that as well, putting it in hatcheries. Sex is just anytime, anywhere, with anyone, under any conditions. So sex all the time, and birth is this managed process. Well, same thing here, and they disconnect love and sex in both stories. But here it becomes more sordid now, in a way that I don't think you see in Huxley's Brave New World. There's no sense of it being sordid, whereas here he enjoys the fact that it's sordid, and so does she. There's a perversity, this self-loathing in the whole thing. And he sort of loathes her, and she's sort of, I'm not sure she's not a moral character in the way Winston Smith is. She doesn't seem to care. He begins that way. At least we have some sense that he has a moral nature. I don't get that sense with Julia. To the same degree. I mean, that's my sense. She's just she's motivated not by defiance towards Big Brother, per se. Or if she is, it's just more, well, that makes the sex more fun or something. And that's not really what's motivating him. Right? So there's something there in her motivation which is more degraded than him. Yeah. So Winston Smith works in the Ministry of Truth, and his job is rewriting historical records so that what the party says about history is reflected in the records. And I say to you, on the internet, everything up there it's a vast amount, but it can be edited at any point and changed because it's digital. Physical books are really important to prevent totalitarianism. Because if it's in one place and it's digital, you can restrict access to it. You can change the words even. And there's no record of the change, at least not overt on the page. you can do a Wayback Machine and find it, as long as those are permissible and so forth. But so he rewrites history, and what's interesting is, although he does this and is clearly involved in doing great harm to his fellow human beings by changing historical records, he longs to escape this oppression on a personal level. And he hopes that there are other people in the world like him that are going to try and overthrow this government. And so he's looking for one. And he goes into an antique shop, meets a man named Mr. Charrington, and buys a diary in which he can record his true feelings about the party. And he believes in his heart that it's the working class proles, as he calls it, the proletariat, Marxist term, that are the key to the revolution. And when he goes to them, the working classes, what he finds is they have no appetite for revolution at all. They don't care. So in Aldous Huxley's Brave New Worlds, the equivalent of the proles, they exist in in Arizona or like desert places. Here they exist in the midst of the people. The only people that they're really interested in controlling are the intelligentsia, so the elite and the middle classes. The working class, the proles, they'll leave them alone, and the proles don't even care. They have children, by the way, and families and so forth, and they just don't care. As long as they're left alone, they're not going to overthrow anything. Just leave us alone. So what we see illustrated here is something along the lines of what C.S. Lewis writes in an essay called The Inner Ring. And that is the desire of people who are trying to climb the ladder to belong to the inner circle. And they're willing to do degrading things to get into the inner circle. You know, like in school. Like if you want to be one of the gang, one of the friend group, then you're going to have to do this. You have to dislike those people. Like, this is our group, that's their group. So you have to say bad things about them, do bad things. You might have to do something to degrade yourself. And then you feel like you're in. And then when you get in the group, you find that actually there isn't this sort of solidarity, community, acceptance that you were hoping for. And there's a thought that maybe there's a inner group within the group, and there's a couple of guys there that are the best friends or whatever. As I say, Lewis talks about this and says that many people lose their virginity as much from this desire to belong and be accepted as they do from actual sexual attraction. The desire to be accepted and welcomed and received as one of the group, one of the cool kids. That's what's driving 1984, is this dynamic. And Winston Smith, who is an intelligent man, thinks that by following and doing what the intelligent people do, he will advance in his career. And he's grown dissatisfied with that. But he finds that the common people are not dissatisfied because they never wanted anything so lofty anyway. They don't care. They just want to watch sports and eat and drink beer and go about their lives. That's all they care about. That seems realistic to me as well, actually. And he hears of the existence of an underground resistance movement, and that's called the Brotherhood, and it's surrounding the work of this man I said was probably Jewish, Emanuel Goldstein, and he's the rival of Big Brother. And so anyone who is against Big Brother and Big Brother's after must be a good guy in Winston's estimation, because Big Brother is despite the way he's acting in public, he knows Big Brother is wrong and oppressive and evil. So Emanuel Goldstein must be something equivalent to the Savior. And he's drawn to a man who he meets named O'Brien, and he thinks O'Brien's also involved in the resistance. And this is part of I'm trying to remember what was like when I first read this, but I think I had a suspicion that O'Brien wasn't what he seemed. Was that your sense? Oh, you read the film. Okay. So you ruined it for yourself by.
No, I literally was scrolling and I was like, what's O'Brien doing? And I was like, wait a minute. So now every time I see him, I'm like,
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I had no idea until like
Good. I didn't either.
Until, wait, there's this one.
I don't think I knew until the very end, until part 3.
This one part in the book that seems suspicious, and I was like, no.
But you dismissed it.
Yeah, I was like, no, he can't do that.
Yeah, no, and that's what I did, because I was so much on Winston Smith's side and so much wanted him to have an ally to overthrow this oppressive big brother, that I was willing to overlook the fact that there was something odd about what he said there. And it was tipped off to me. And so if you if you knew before what you knew after, you would immediately say, well, of course. But I didn't, because I wanted to believe there was a way out. And that's why I say Orwell is brilliant in his characterization and motivations, because that people want to see, they want to believe that other people are basically good and that the outcome will be a happy ending in the end. Now, when I say people, that's a very Western thing as well. It's a very American thing. I'll even go on to say, the idea that every story is going to have a happy ending is very American. If you read the Norse sagas, like with Thor and Odin and so, it begins in doom. Likewise, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, it has this aura of doom. Inevitable defeat is coming, which is very anti-American. Americans believe in technology and progress and victory. Right in the end, the hero, the cavalry come over the hill. Just when everything's all done, the cavalry come over the hill. Great. That's one of the worst aspects of the film Lord of the Rings, by the way, is they make it unremittingly positive. In the conclusion, the book ends with the scouring of the Shire. So evil perdures beyond the destruction of the ring. Why is that bad? We'll get into that when we do Lord of the Rings together. He gave it a Hollywood ending. The king marries the bride, the evil is destroyed, the hobbits are exalted and given crowns, and everyone bows down to the hobbits because the hobbits have served the others, and they've been disregarded as heroes and they're the true heroes, etc. Warms the heart. But that's not Tolkien's story. Yeah, they do it all the time. They Hollywood everything. They Disneyfy everything. Well, that's why he did it. So again, but then you have to ask the question if Peter Jackson films The Lord of the Rings and gives it a happy ending, even though the story doesn't have that, what is that saying about what Americans want from art? And do they actually want art, or do they want propaganda? Everyone wants a happy ending to a story. No, I understand that. And that's what makes the bad ending so poignant, is because we really wanted this, and yet it doesn't turn out that way. So there's this bitter sweetness there, but it's not even sweetness necessarily. There's a bitter end to it. But that's informed by Scripture as much as anything, The Bible is what gives us the expectation of the ultimate victory of good over evil. And there it does it in the midst of defeat. We're in Holy Week as I speak right now. The event of the cross is the centerpiece of Western history, in which God is defeated on the cross, and yet intends to be defeated and destroys sin and death through that defeat, and rises victorious on the third day. Right? But that is a very odd ending for a hero story. Heroes don't get killed in the end, let alone victimized and scapegoated and falsely treated, and their friends abandoned. Like it's a story that is recognizable, but the the sting in the tail is very bitter indeed, except it isn't. Because in Genesis 3:15, it says the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. And the seed of the woman is Jesus, and he's just crushed the head of the serpent. Right? He removes the curse of death, removes sin by bearing it. So all those things. Whereas here, it's unremittingly negative. And so it's almost unbearable. 1984 is almost unbearable. In the way, if you ever read Thomas Hardy's novels, it's also almost unbearable. Fatalistic, deterministic. You have no sense that the ending could be escaped. It's doom. Doom is coming, and you can't escape it. And that's not a very biblical way of looking at it. But that is the trajectory of 20th century fiction, is of doom and futility and growing mass control by an elite over the populace because they're atheists. And there are no other gods. They don't believe in other gods, but they themselves become gods on earth, and people worship the state. That's how the book of Revelation puts it even. They worship the state as God. It's Hegel, actually. Early 19th century German philosopher. They worship the state as God. Vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. He's a French revolutionary, by the way, Hegel. So he meets a woman named Julia, and she is maintaining novel writing machines. So these are machines that are churning out novels for mass consumption. And he believes she's a spy, and then she passes him a note. And the note says, "I love you." And he thinks, first of all, he doesn't even know what to do with it. Like, what would you do in this situation? It's very strange, but it's also the situation he thinks, she's proposing an affair here, and that's illegal. So she's trying to trap me. Clearly, because there's no way she actually is interested in me. So this is a trap. And if I fall for the trap, so he hates her. He loathes her like nobody else. Even though she finds her attractive, he loathes her because he thinks this is a honey trap, and she's trying to destroy me. So at first she hates him, or he hates her rather. And then, of course, they have an affair, and then it swings the other way. And even though it's rather sordid, and we've learned about his marriage to Catherine, as we say, we find that I think in the relation between Julia and Winston, something of like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, of sorts, against a hostile world. They go away in secret. They try and hide. They're committing sin, except sin here seems better than the alternative. So it's the degrading of human life, even in opposition under a totalitarian regime. That's what I think Orwell is so good at portraying. And then during this, O'Brien, who he meets, invites him to his flat and tells him he's a member of the Brotherhood. And Winston's like, I knew it. And he's really excited about that fact. Gives him a copy of the book by Goldstein, who's the leader of the Brotherhood. And the book then, and I wrote an essay, I remember writing an essay on this, on the book within the book in grade 12. All those many years ago. Yeah, not the play within the play, but the book within the book. And it's about the sort of ideology of the Brotherhood here. I found it fascinating. Do you have a comment or a question, sir?
Winston and Julia, I thought it was going to be like a nice love story
Mm-hmm.
or something, but then after I kind of got grossed.
You got grossed out, as you would, because it's increasingly, let's just meet here and we'll go behind we'll find some place, and then it's basically, it's sexual and that's it, and you go away very quickly so that nobody sees us. So think, really? So that's what it's been reduced to, just that? And so we began with thought, well, it was love that drew her to him and vice versa. And no, it's just sex. It's just, and so they're degraded and we're degraded in the process. Our expectations are degraded, and it's sort of dispiriting to read it. And that's part of the effect of the novel, is to experience the dispiriting effect of totalitarian rule, in which things like love and sex are separated. And again, so that, if I'm contrasting Huxley's Brave New World with this seems more degrading. You feel the degradation here more. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you thought it was there as well, but I didn't get the sense there of anything. It was so superficial. And there wasn't a hero. That's the main thing. We didn't have anyone to identify with. If you don't have a hero you can identify with, it's really hard to be drawn into the story. So that's the failure of Huxley's Brave New World, is the lack of a hero to experience things through and identify with, and to see what's going wrong. So O'Brien gets him on side, and we find out during Hate Week that Oceania's enemy changes. And because of that, because what we have is global powers, we have rather than nations, you have blocks of powers, and there are 3 main blocks, and it was one block that was Oceania's enemy, and then it moved over to another block, so they had to rewrite the history. So it was a very busy week in the Ministry of Truth, where they had to rewrite all the history books to change who the enemy was. 451. Yeah. And all of those dystopian novels in the 20th century have a similar sort of trajectory. They're dealing with the same. One of the things that I think is particularly powerful about Orwell's 1984 is the way they try and control language. That seems to me particularly effective and also convincing and also truthful. That and the way we experience it in North America and Canada, everywhere, is politically correct speech. But now we're not talking about just sex and gender identity. We're talking about things that you can't say and can say, and unacceptable views, which when I grew up, there were no such thing as unacceptable views. There were false views. There were views that you would say are deplorable, but you would never have said, I won't let that person speak that. I'm going to publicly refute them in holding those views, because there's such a thing as truth and falsehood, and I can show that they're wrong. That was tolerance when I grew up. Tolerance now means not allowing people who have unacceptable views to speak even. You get deplatformed, all that sort of stuff, right? So it's very much an advance of totalitarianism. So as I say, O'Brien gives Winston this book written by Goldstein, and they secretly read it. Winston and Julia does, but Julia has no interest. She doesn't care. She doesn't care at all. She's not interested in the revolution, and she's like Winston is more interested in the book than her as well, which is also interesting. But her interest in him is very little. It's just sexual, and there's a sort of rebellion, like a young, adolescent against parents. I'm doing it because I'm told I can't do it, so therefore I want to do it. And that's pretty much the extent of her rebellion. His is much deeper than that. But this book says that if the proles will rise up, that the party can be overthrown, and Winston believes in the proles. The problem is the proles don't care. And then they get arrested. And so that's how the part 2 concludes. And we move into part 3, is Winston and Julia are arrested by Mr. Charrington. Remember, he rents a flat to them above his antiquarian shop. And it turns out that Charrington was working together with O'Brien to catch these two flies in their trap. And part 3 is when it really gets dark. And the true nature of the totalitarian society becomes clear, and its agenda. And I want to spend a whole class looking at the third part because I think it's the most interesting and significant of the 3 parts. And he's more interested in mind control. That's what Orwell's interested in. It's not totalitarianism per se, it's about mind control and thought control through language control. And I think everyone can recognize that. If you go to school now, it's quickly made clear to you there are certain things that you can't talk about, you can't say, you can't even think. But when you're with your friends, you might talk about it and joke about it, but not in public. And if a comedian does it, people die laughing. Oh, he said it. So I don't think, although it's considered dystopian and futuristic, I think it's very much of a description of contemporary society as Orwell finds it in 1949. I think it's still actually the case today, maybe even more so than it used to be. I'll age myself. I read 1984 in 1984, which is a weird experience. You read a futuristic novel about a time which is now your time, right? So you can't have that experience because it's 2026, not 1984. But I read it in 1984 and looked around and say, well, what is about that world which is like ours today? It wasn't very realistic. Because as I say, it was the Cold War. It seemed to be realistic about the Soviet Union. It sounded realistic about them. You know, regulated lives, constant surveillance, control of language, control of history, use of propaganda, use of fear, people spying on each other, you know, managing, organizing society. That described the communist world, but it didn't describe the free world. Since I read it in 1984, now the West seems more like communist bloc. The USSR seems to have come to North America. So now 1984 seems realistic here, and it didn't in 1984. And I just say that because you wouldn't know that. It was not realistic fiction. It was dystopian and improbable. And oh, this must be what it's like living in East Germany. And the answer is it was like that in East Germany, but it wasn't like that in Canada, and it wasn't like that in West Germany. And I tell you that because I lived in West Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall and so forth. And you could see the divergence and differences there. And now you can't see it. So use of technology, use of writing to control thought, and all these prompt reflections then on the use of the media and what we mean by the media and the use of the media to form opinions, which during our age of social media has changed in a different direction yet again. Like this little device that I'm recording this lecture on, that everyone carries around in their pockets, that they look down to all the time. Those didn't exist 12 years ago. I don't know when they first came, a smartphone, but was it 2012? Something like that? I don't know. Which is 97? 2007 rather. Okay, so that was the first iteration. but I don't know if it had the full features that it does now. Okay, so they've been around your whole life. So again, that changes your view of reality and how you engage with it. I've noticed that people will. I mean, I have children. They grew up in an era where smartphones are just part of who you are. They're attached to. People communicate through their cell phones rather than speak to the person beside them. They sit there typing texts. Why don't you just speak to the person? They're right there. You want to know why? Because you don't get incentivized to speak to the person next to you. There isn't a dopamine hit that comes from the likes and the buzzes when you receive a message back. It buzzes, and that actually gives you a dopamine hit, and so you feel exhilarated, and you don't get that when you're just talking to a person. And so what you have is a mediated form of communication through the machine. The machine is part of you, and you are a slave to the machine. It serves you, and you serve it. And as I say, social media companies give you their free software, and there is no such thing as free software or free anything. The product in social media is you. Your information is being sold to some company so that they can sell information to you. But all of your profile, your likes, your history, your location, your identity, your age, your sex, your religious activities, all those things are captured by what you do by browsing on the internet, and that follows you around, and then people sell. You are the product being sold to companies so they can sell things to you. So you are being commodified. So that's a good way to conclude this lecture. And what we saw in A Modest Proposal, where people are commodified and treated as something less than human or sold as goods, you are a good that is being sold. You have absolute freedom. You feel like you're free. You can think and do whatever you want, except you've been bought without even paying you. You've been given something that monitors you. So it's drawings, and so I conclude this course because it's really a way of looking at ourselves. That's what I want to do at the end of the course, and get you to reflect on that over the whole course from the beginning to the end, is how did we get to this point, and then how should we really think about it as Christians, as people who think that there are problems with the totalitarian view. How do we do differently and think differently and act differently and engage with people that are sort of caught and trapped in that world? Anyway, I'll leave off with that. So next time we'll do part 3. Okay?